So you've probably figured out by now I want to talk about generosity. It's summertime. It's our summer prosperity activities are going on online. And have you heard the phrase, life is not a one-way street? I kind of see life as a one-way street. At least that's the way I want to do it. I want to see life as this thing where opportunities and resources and energy and all of the goodness of life flows to me. But I'm not a dead end. I'm not a cul-de-sac. All this stuff's coming to me, and it's got to go out. And that's a one-way float for me. It isn't about trying to match everything that I get from the source that I get it. I mean, it's all God, I agree. But it's not like because somebody does a kindness to me that I'm mandated to match that kindness back to them. I'm mandated to have kindness flowing out of me in some direction. And the more it flows, the better. And the beauty of it is being that generator of kindness, the more kindness that comes from me, the more I generate out. But then the universe is the same way. The more I generate out, the more kindness is going to show up for me in whatever form or shape or substance it may be. That's the natural flow of things. And that feels like going in one way is really a good thing. But it doesn't always seem like that. I'm not sure that this idea of generosity is an automatic thing for people. And I'll talk more about that in a second, but I want to share a story that really talks about some of the complexities of this idea of generosity. It's a story about two brothers who were farmers. They both grew up on the same farm and ended up being in charge of the farm. Their parents were gone. And they each had a home on this farm. The older brother lived in the main house with his wife and children. He had a couple of children. And the younger brother, lived in another house across a field. And they loved each other and they worked together very well. But each one of them had a notion. The older brother said, I've got a great life. I live in this wonderful house. I've got a wife. I've got kids. My kids are going to take care of me when I get old. And my brother, he's alone. So I think that I should take some of the bounty of our farm and give it to my brother, but I don't feel like I should tell him. I'm just going to do it quietly. So what he would do in the middle of the night is he would take a bag of grain. He would take it over to his brother's home, and he would pour it in the storage place where his brother kept his grain. And he felt really good about that, and he never told his brother that he was doing this. Now, his younger brother had his own thoughts on this, and he was thinking, my brother's got a wife to take care of and two kids, and he's got a lot of responsibility. He lives in a much bigger house. There's more to do with that house that he has to do. I want to do something for him. So he would get up in the middle of the night, and he would take a bag of grain over and put it where his brother kept his storage of grain. This went on for years. And they both expected to hear at some time from their brother that their bounty of grain had grown substantially. That's not what happened. And what resolved it is, of course, one night the two of them met in the middle of the field. And you might think, well, what a waste of time. What a waste of time to be carrying all that grain around and it not really making a difference. But it did make a difference because those two brothers understood that they were loved. And they received this generosity from their sibling. And it made a real difference in their life. So even though it didn't change the amount of a bounty that each of them had, it did fill their lives with a richness that had deep meaning and value to both of them. This is why we're generous. We're not generous because we're keeping score. That's not it. We're generous because it makes us the people we want to be. It opens us up to a life that is richer than it would be if we were not generous. Generosity is, as I said already, doesn't come natural for everybody. Some people have to learn how to be generous. You've seen kids, mine, my toy, my game, my thing. No, you can't have it. Okay, maybe that's a phase. I've heard a story of a mother who had that child that was into mine and would struggle with that with him. And one day, right after Easter, he had his chocolate Easter bunny, one of those big ones. Usually I think they're hollow so that you can break them, but he was going out to play with friends, and he had his Easter bunny with him, and he'd already eaten the ears. But he was out there, and his mom came out and said, "Why didn't you share some of your Easter bunny with your friends?" "No, it's my Easter bunny." His mother thought for a moment and said, "You're right. It is your Easter bunny, and only you can share it." He thought. So he walked over to a friend and he broke off a piece of chocolate. He said, "It's for you." And to the next one, "It's for you." And as he did this, you could see him lightening up and enjoying the task, like he was in charge and he got to do this great thing. He was learning to be generous. So we all, at some level, have some work to do to learn even more how to be generous. And the whole idea of generosity is way more than anything physical. In fact, it has elements to it that just so far exceed that in so many ways. But the idea is that there's some kind of interconnection. We did this with our meditation, an interconnection of happiness and generosity. There's something about that fits together very nicely. The Buddha had 6 perfections for the heart and mind of all people. The first of those perfections was generosity, and still is, of course. When we learn how to be generous, it truly makes us happier people. But it's not like the generosity has to come first. I think that happy people are more generous just by their nature. That what we do in our lives, when we are in that dynamic flow of spirit, as I incessantly call it, we're more happy, we're more joyous. It feels better, it's more natural for us. The idea of trying to acquire things and keep them is stale. And it gets stagnant because you can pack up all kinds of stuff in bank accounts and vaults and garages and such as that. You can amass great wealth and still be completely miserable in all of the comfort that brings you. That there's work to do on being in this thing of not holding back from people. I believe that we all have, I'm sure we're going to find that phone here soon. I believe that we all have an innate ability to support one another because we live in an interconnected world. We live in a world where we're not on our own and we are not engaging in life by ourselves. It's impossible. We have to do it with other people. It's unnatural otherwise. And if all we want from other people is for them to give us something, then we're never going to find happiness. We're always going to fall short. And I know that that's not where you are. I'm not suggesting that we have a room full of greedy people. But I'm suggesting that this is something that we all can continue to work on, to cultivate within us this natural way of being generous, this natural ability to flow out. I don't know if you do this, but there's something that I enjoy doing. We don't have a lot of tolls here in Asheville, but when Barbara and I go to Florida, there's always a toll somewhere. And when we go through there, most of them are, $1 or less. And if it's one of those that I can, where there's a toll taker, there's not many toll takers anymore, but I know of one in particular that still has that. And when you go through, I always like to pay for the car behind me, no matter what it is. And it just, I don't know, it gets me giddy. I remember once one guy raced up to get next to me and go, thank you. You know, it was like really important for him to say thank you, and it wasn't important to me. It was just kind of fun to do it. Another one that I've learned to do, and yes, I'm going to have to confess that I do at times go through fast food drive-thrus. I do. And I get this kick out of paying for the person behind me, because the beauty of that system is if there's a line, that when I'm ready to pay my money, they already know what the next person's bill is. So I say, I'm paying for mine and for the car behind me. They're getting used to that, I think, at some of these places, because they don't even flinch. They say, sure, and they take my money, and I go on. And I get this giddy feeling about it. It's fun to do that. And I don't care if they know who I am, if they ever see me again, or if they ever see me at all. But there's something about that little tiny act of sharing that just is lovely and fills me with a sense of joy. Because there's some elements in this thing called generosity that truly give us value in our lives. It's a statement of who we are, that we have more than enough, and that's the key element here, if you're looking at it from a prosperity standpoint, that we have more than enough to be able to share in moments like that, with this center, and in other places in our lives. We're telling ourselves that we are not poor, that there is not any chance that we're not going to pay the rent or the mortgage or whatever other expenses we have, that we're being responsible with all of that. Everything gets paid, and there's more than enough. And there will always be more than enough. And then when we remember that, that's how our life is organized. That's exactly what happens, without exception. And it doesn't matter that we keep count of that. It doesn't matter at all. Our work is to remember this, that we always have more than enough, and to live from that knowing. Let's see what else I wanted to share with you here. That idea of learning to be generous. Some people learn it when they're kids. I would imagine some people never learn it, and they die sadly, alone, afraid, angry. But when you've got this on your side, you can see that it changes things. Let me tell you another story. This is a story about a woman that was in hospice. She had an inoperable tumor in her tongue. And it was in a place they couldn't operate on it. They couldn't take it out. She'd had the chemotherapy and all. And she'd gone through the regimen, and it was still there. And it was getting worse. And she was in hospice because she needed the extra care, because she couldn't, she was in danger of not being able to breathe, not being able to swallow. So this was a challenge, and they needed doctors to be with her so that she didn't have this even greater sense of suffering in her life as she was dealing with this. One morning, when her day nurse came in, the woman was sitting on the edge of her bed, dressed, street clothes, with her bag packed right next to her. And the nurse looked at her and said, "What are you doing?" And she said, "I'm going home." The nurse said, "Why? What happened?" She said, "Well, I had a dream last night. And someone came to me and said I would be the next one to die here. I can't die. I can't die right now." And she said, "Why?" She said, "I have to go home." So the nurse sent in the doctor, and the doctor explained to her again why she had to be there, that this tumor was too big, and it was impeding her ability to be safe without being in that facility. And she said, "Okay, I'll take care of that." And she stayed in hospice 2 more days, and her tumor shrunk significantly in 2 days. And the doctor acquiesced and said, "Okay, you can go home." So she went home. Her issue was that she had blamed her husband for living an unfulfilled life, that he hadn't given her all the money and the possessions that she wanted, that he hadn't given her everything that she imagined would make her life whole. And she realized she was wrong, that she had everything she would ever need. So she went home to be with her husband. And for the next 2 weeks, she showered him with affection and appreciation. She was finally being generous. After 2 weeks, she went back to hospice, and she passed quietly in her sleep the next day with a sense of contentment, a sense that she had completed her work, that she knew who she was. What a gift. Kind of hard way to get it. And I'm not suggesting that we should all have these maladies that would keep us from feeling whole so that we get it. Why don't we just get it? Why don't we just be generous with the people that we love? Why don't we just be generous with the people that we're pretty indifferent about? Why don't we give them a little more of our time and attention when they ask for it? Why don't we even be generous with the people that annoy us? They're God just as much as anybody else. How much more would it take to just open up and live that kind of life no matter what? I know sometimes I resist it. Sometimes I don't want to acknowledge somebody. But that doesn't serve me. That doesn't help me live the life I've come here to live. My life is to stop and pay attention, to give whoever's in front of me my absolute 100% attention so that they can know I'm there for them. I say to Barbara all the time, she's generous because she is, and she does that. She'll stop and talk to anyone that wants her attention. She'll be completely present for them. It's something we all can do, and we can do it joyously. And the truth of that is that when we do that, we get the blessing every bit as much as we give. And that's a better way to be in the world. At least for me it is. So I would ask you, how generous are you? And I'm not asking you to answer, just to think about it. How many people are on your list that if they called, you would drop everything and go help them? Is that a big list or a little list? How many people do you focus your attention on? You give your time to? And even support. One thing that I don't do in my life, and I found this very helpful, I don't lend. I don't lend money or tools or cars or anything of the sort. But I'm real glad to give you something if I can. You don't have to pay it back, because that gets in the way. That's an exchange thing. That's trying to balance something. It's not our job to balance. Life will balance itself. It's our job to be as open and available as we can. And when we are, we get the payoff every single time. So I have one more story to share with you. It's not my story, but it's the greatest story I know on the idea of being generous. It's the story of two little girls who had a pretty rough time growing up. Their family didn't have much. And the way their dynamics in their family were is that if they weren't in school, they were shooed outside right after breakfast, probably. And the doors were locked, and they were not allowed back in until dark that night. They had to fend for themselves. And oftentimes there was no food in the middle of the day. If they wanted water, they got it from a garden hose. And they were scruffy. And they weren't real popular in the neighborhood, because if they went into neighbors' yards, the neighbors would all shoo them away. Get out of my yard! That kind of thing. That is all but one. There was a neighbor down the road. Her name was Mrs. Lewis. And Mrs. Lewis was a generous person by nature. When these two little girls would come into her yard, she would come out and greet them. She knew them from church. She also knew their reputation. It didn't matter. She would invite them in for a snack. She would listen to them and share with them and tell them stories and listen to theirs. And they had a place to go where they were safe. where they were nurtured. In a life that wasn't offering much more of that to them. Yeah. And if they weren't allowed to come in for whatever reason, other things were going on in the house, these two little girls always had access to the garden and orchard where they could pick food on their own at any time, which made them very happy. So a lifetime of knowing this as little girls created two of the most generous people I know. The love of my life and her beautiful sister. And I've heard the story of Mrs. Lewis over and over again and how that touched their hearts and touches my hearts. And I know it's touching your heart. That there was a woman in the world that could be that generous and that loving to two ratty little girls that lived down the road. And out of that, two of the most beautiful people I know. So we're going to end this with some quotes. I got some good ones today. This one comes from John Lewis, the congressman and icon of the civil rights movement. He was a mentor of Martin Luther King, and I actually met him when I was working in Atlanta. Had a conversation with him. He was an amazing man. This is from his memoirs. Let me read this to you aloud. Every possible thought we pass between us makes room for more light. And if we do more than think, then our actions clear the path for even more light. Our actions entrench the power of the light on this planet. This is why forgiveness and compassion must become more important principles of our society. John Lewis's success in the world was out of his generosity, and he had every reason not to be generous. He was beat up many times for taking a stand against racism. But he wouldn't stop. He wouldn't stop. He always had his marching orders, and he followed through. But this was the essence of who he was, a man who sought to have greater light in the world. How brilliant is that? Thank you, John Lewis. Here's another profound thought. If you have an opportunity to be generous, take it. It's clever, isn't it? But it's profound at the same time. Do you know who said that? I can't keep that from you guys. It's true. To be generous is an opportunity. It's an opportunity to do something meaningful in the world. So don't hold back on that. And we'll close with Rumi. Listen to these words. Find the real world. Give it endlessly away. Grow rich, flinging gold at all who ask. Live at the empty heart of paradox. There, I'll dance with you cheek to cheek. Live your life generously. Live your life openly with kindness and compassion. You live your life with love, and you'll have everything you could ever need, no matter what. I love you very much. God bless you. Thank you.